What's up, everybody? A very happy Monday night if you are on the East Coast with me. A very happy Monday afternoon if you are on the West Coast and have just watched the Seattle Mariners sweep the Houston Astros in 4 games at T-Mobile Park, and the M's back to within a game of 500 at 8-9. This is the Refuse to Lose podcast. Brady Farkas with you, your Refuse to Lose host, and your Mariners on Roundtable Sports publisher. I certainly do appreciate everybody who listens to all of our episodes here. We got a lot of great feedback on our Casey Lawrence episode on Friday. Casey was gracious with his time and phenomenal in his thoughtfulness. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to that interview. The tone of this episode as a whole is certainly better than the tone of that one was, as the Mariners have won those 4 consecutive games against the Astros to get to 8-9. As a reminder, in addition to listening to our episodes, which are free, we also invite you to join our free Mariners on Roundtable Sports community, marinersroundtable.com. Myself and Taryn Kovac are doing everything we can to build our site to then grow this podcast as well. The best way that you can help us, the number one, I have people ask me, how can we help you, Brady? Can we donate money? No, the answer is simple. Follow, like, subscribe this podcast, and join our Mariners on Roundtable Sports community. Both of them are free. We just want you to be part of the conversation. We want you to engage with us, to engage with other Mariners fans. That is how you help us grow. We've got an unbelievable guest coming up at the end of the podcast today. His name is Taimur Rushdie. A lot of you, I don't think, know who Taimur Rushdie is, but you're going to by the time the interview is over. I'll tell you a little more about him as we get closer, but Taimur Rushdie is going to stop by. We are live right now on YouTube as well and on X. If you want to comment with your thoughts on the M's or ask questions, you certainly can do that. Again, live podcast right now, but if you're listening after the fact, audio only, always available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The M's are 8-9. They went on Monday 6-2, a 4-game sweep of the Houston Astros. Without further ado, let go.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And here we go.
All right. When we talked on Friday, the Mariners had lost 5 consecutive games and had gone through Anaheim with a 1-5 road trip through Anaheim and Texas. Now they come home. They certainly get right, beating the Astros in these 4 games. And again, a 6-2 win on Monday. Before we talk specifics, and we will talk specifics, but before we do, I just want to reiterate something. If you were with me last year and you listened to this podcast through last season's magical 2025, you probably heard me say this 50 times. But if you're new to the podcast now, and this is your first season with me, your first episode, this might be the first time you've ever heard me say this, but it remains true. If you want to be a good and successful baseball team, there are 2 things you have to do. There are 2 things to me that are non-negotiable. 1 is you have to win at home. And 2 is you have to be able to beat the teams that you are supposed to beat. Those are non-negotiables. Yes, every once in a while, you're going to run into a series where you sweep a really good team on the road, but those things are rare. The things that have to be consistent, the things you have to do consistently year in and year out, if you want to be good, is you have to win at home and you have to beat the teams that you are supposed to beat. The Mariners were at home this weekend. They won all 4. Check. And this version of the Astros, right? This version of the Astros, with all the injuries that they have, this version of the Astros is a team the Mariners were supposed to beat, and they did. Before we break down any specifics, those 2 things are very important to know. The Mariners did them. They deserve credit for that. I will always give a team credit for winning at home and beating who they're supposed to beat, because those to me are foundational tenets of what good teams do. And the Mariners want to be a good team, and we have thought they were the makings of a good team. They didn't play like it through the first 13 games. They played like it over the course of the last 4. Now, more specifically, the story of this weekend is obviously the offensive breakout. 9 runs in the win on Friday, 9-6. 8 runs in the win on Saturday, 8-7. 6 runs on Sunday, 6-1. And 6 more on Monday, 6-2. Those numbers are certainly excellent, and you would take scoring 6 runs or more every time out 8 days a week. But that said, the thing I actually feel most good about is not the number of runs scored. It is A, that the approaches looked significantly better over the last 4 games, and B, the World Baseball Classic guys, you can tell, are coming out of their hibernation. Those two things to me are more important than the volume of runs scored. Although, of course, the volume of runs scored is hugely important as well and gives you a lot more margin for error. But I think the approach and the WBC guys showing an offensive kind of pulse, that is the real big story of this weekend. Now, to the approach first, if you listened on Friday, you heard me ask, what is the approach for this team and what is the approach for a number of these players? Because on Friday's episode, I wasn't sure. Through the Angels series and through Texas, I was not sure what the approach was. We saw a far more disciplined group over these 4 games against the Astros. Now, look, the Astros walked 1 million batters in this series, specifically in the first 3 games. They created some of their own mess. There is no doubt about that. But the Mariners contributed to that mess as well. Now, go back to the first 13 games. How many times did we see the Mariners get themselves out through those first 13? How many times did we see them expand the zone? How many times did we see them expand early? Josh Naylor swings at a first pitch, beats it into the ground ball to first. Dom Canzone swings at a first pitch splitter, gets himself out. Cal Raleigh chases. Julio Rodriguez chases. Those are things we saw. Getting yourself out early and actually getting yourself out in general and getting yourself out early. Bill Belichick always used to say in the NFL, the first rule of learning how to win is learning how not to beat yourself, right? The first rule of learning how to win games is learning not how to lose them. And when you start getting yourself out consistently and you start getting yourself out early consistently, then you are creating losing habits, right? You are defeating yourself. This weekend over the 4 games, the Mariners didn't do that stuff. Again, they deserve credit for that. The Astros created some of their own mess, but the Mariners contributed to it. They didn't expand the zone. They didn't get themselves out. The approaches were significantly better. And as a result, they drew a huge amount of walks. They created offensive traffic. They didn't always cash it in. There were still things to be desired through at least the first 3 games of this series. But the more chances you give yourself, the more chances you have to score. And eventually good teams break through. And eventually the Mariners broke through. Dom Canzone, big hit late in the game on Friday. Obviously, the J.P. Crawford hits on Saturday. The Luke Raley kind of backbreaker on Sunday. And then really throughout the game on Monday. And again, another Luke Raley hit that brought in a run. The Mariners created enough scoring chances, and eventually they were able to capitalize enough as well. These 4 games were a great step in revitalizing the Mariners offense and turning the Mariners offense into what we thought that it could be heading into the season. Now, I still felt like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday were imperfect. Better, but imperfect. Again, a number of scoring chances the Mariners weren't able to capitalize on. They weren't able to get the knockout punch as early as I thought that they should have. But they did eventually get those knockout punches on Friday and Sunday. And on Monday, that is the day I felt like we really started to see the offense click and become the thing that we thought it could be coming into the season. The Mariners, look, I will always take it when a team wants to give you free base runners. If the Astros want to walk 1 million runners or walk 1 million batters, I will always take extra traffic. But on Monday, the Mariners weren't beholden to the walk. They generated the traffic on their own, and that's the next step, right? For the first 3 games, the Astros gifted you some of the traffic, and you eventually were able to knock the door down. On Monday, you knocked the door down yourself, and that is a very big difference, and that is the next step in the evolution of offense. I mean, up and down the lineup, the Mariners did it. Every starter for the Mariners had a hit on Monday except for Cole Young and Randy Arozarena. So that's 7 guys who had hits in the lineup. 5 guys had multiple hits, each of 2, 3, and 4. Cal Raleigh, Julio Rodriguez, Josh Naylor. Naylor had the 2 homers. Brendan Donovan had multiple hits, and Luke Raley had 3 hits. So 13 hits in total. 7 different guys get them. 5 guys have multiple hits. That is the depth of offense that we thought this team could have, and that is what they showed on Monday. So I feel generally good about the offense through the series as a whole. I feel great about what we saw in the win on Monday. The approaches were better. It led to better offense throughout the weekend. But Monday, I thought, was the Mona Lisa of the whole thing. I thought it was the Mona Lisa of the whole thing. Luke Raley had an excellent weekend. Arozarena, I thought, had a pretty good weekend. We obviously saw some better swings from Cal, a better approach from Cal, and Julio Rodriguez had 7 hits. I mean, the Astros do not have a good pitching staff right now. This version of the Astros is not a good pitching staff, but the Mariners certainly contributed to it also. I saw a stat, by the way. This came from Paul Hembekides of ESPN. The Astros are 0-8 in their last 8 games, right? They've lost 8 consecutive. They've allowed 64 runs and 51 walks in that time. They are the first team in 18 years to do that while having an 8-game losing streak. 64 runs allowed, an average of 8 runs allowed per game. 51 walks, an average of 5, more than 6 walks a game. They're the first team in 18 years to have that in an 8-game losing streak. So the offensive approach was better. It contributed to some of that. When the Astros gave chances, the Mariners did a better job at knocking it down. But Monday, man, I felt really, really good about it. And as a result, the M's are 1 game away from being back at 500 right now at 8-9. Now, sticking with the offense, and I got a lot of things I want to get to. Again, if you're watching live, you can get in here on YouTube. You can get in on X, but there's a long list of things I want to get to before we get to Tamor Rushdie. I know a lot of people roll their eyes at the World Baseball Classic being an excuse, right? People have said, we've had Buster Olney on our episodes, and he's wondered how big a deal the WBC was in terms of guys kind of not being in a rhythm. And people roll their eyes at that. But I think it's very important to note, or at least important to observe, that the Mariners World Baseball Classic offensive players are all kind of coming out of it here at the same time. Again, Cal Raleigh had a poor spring. He had a poor WBC. He went 0 for 9, didn't play regularly, came back and had a pretty dreadful first 2 weeks. Well, all of a sudden, he homers on Friday. His at-bats are looking better. They're still not perfect, but the at-bats look better, and he looks more comfortable in the box, and he's got his timing better, and his eye is better. So Cal Raleigh starting to come out of hibernation. Julio Rodriguez, again, 7 hits in this series. He did pretty much everything we want to see from Julio. We saw him hit the ball more consistently, less strikeouts. We saw him hit the ball harder. We saw him pull the ball, and we saw him hit the ball in the air, and we saw him homer. When Julio is cold at the beginning of seasons, everything's on the ground, and a lot of things are to the right side. And that's what we saw for the first 2 weeks of this season. But in this series, pulled the ball, hit the ball harder, hit the ball in the air, hit the ball more consistently. Great steps for Julio. Naylor, obviously, the 2 home runs on Monday. The lineup is much different with these 3 players. And I will say Arozarena, I think, has swung the bat pretty well no matter what. I think he would be the guy I would say is kind of immune from the WBC struggles, or I wouldn't lump him in, but he has hit very well as well throughout the season, and he had a good weekend. So the lineup is much different when these 4 players are hitting. and they all hit this weekend. There is a lot to build on here. Multi-hit games on Monday for Cal Raleigh, Julio Rodriguez, Naylor. Rodriguez and Arozarena had multi-hit games on Sunday. It was a good weekend all around for Mariners offense. And I do think it is interesting to note that, again, all the WBC guys kind of coming out of their slumber at the same time. All right. I also want to give massive credit to both George Kirby and Logan Gilbert. Huge, massive credit to both of them. What they did on Sunday and Monday for this team cannot be overstated. Logan Gilbert goes a full 7 innings for the first time since opening day last year on Sunday. And George Kirby goes 7 2/3 on Monday. Again, it cannot be overstated how important those things were, because you enter this series, right? The Mariners had an off day after they're getting swept by the Rangers. They had an off day last Thursday. Going into Friday night, the Mariners have 13 games in 13 days, no days off. 13 games, 13 days, no days off. We have talked for months about the lack of flexibility in the Mariners bullpen. There's really not a lot of room. Cole Wilcox is the only guy that can kind of be shuttled up and down. So there's not a lot of room to have the bullpen have to eat up large portions of games and then just start shuffling guys back and forth. Like we saw the Astros having to do, shuffling multiple guys up and down. Mariners don't have that ability. They have one flexible spot right now in the bullpen, and that's the Cole Wilcox spot. So they can't afford to eat through their bullpen in 13 games in 13 days. The bullpen is going to be taxed. There's really no way around it. They can't eat through it and then get away with it by multiplying or by sending guys up and down. The only way around any of this for the Mariners is great starting pitching, is starting pitching that goes deep into games. And the Mariners got it on Sunday. They got it on Monday, and they totally reset things. Because think about this. On Friday, after that off day, the Mariners won 9-6. But we saw Edward Bizardo. We saw Matt Brash. We saw Andres Munoz. And I believe we saw Gabe Spire as well. So all of your leverage guys pitched on Friday, and the Mariners won. Great. We go to Saturday. Remember, the Mariners were down 7-2. But they ultimately come back. And as a result, we see a lot of the leverage guys again. Bizardo pitched again. Brash pitched again. Munoz pitched again. So now those guys have gone back-to-back games early in the season. I don't believe that Dan Wilson wanted to pitch them at all on Sunday. And you know what? He was able to avoid it on Sunday because Logan Gilbert went 7 innings to reset the bullpen. Ferrer pitched on Sunday and Chris Swell. So now the bullpen was reset going into Monday. But, oh, by the way, George Kirby was excellent, and they only had to use Brash for a third of an inning and then Cole Wilcox. So now the Mariners are going to go into San Diego onto game 5 of 13, and they're going to have Andres Munoz on 2 days rest. They're going to have Edward Bizardo on 2 days rest. They're going to have Gabe Spire on 2 days rest. And they're going to have Matt Brash at least on having only thrown to a third of an inning in Monday's game. That is about as good a situation as you can have heading into what is now 9 more games in 9 days. San Diego and Texas this week, and then on to next week as well. So George Kirby and Logan Gilbert deserve a ton of credit for what they did for this pitching staff. They were awesome on their own. They were economical. They pounded the strike zone. They got some quick outs themselves. They limited the free passes. It was a fun display of pitching, but what it meant to the roster as a whole, again, it cannot be overstated. Absolutely cannot be overstated just how important this group was, or just how important these performances were from, again, Gilbert and Kirby. They were excellent. Absolutely excellent. All right, let's stick with pitching. All right, let's talk a little bit about Luis Castillo, because actually, let's talk about both Luis Castillo and Emerson Hancock. It is too early to talk about removing Luis Castillo from the rotation. And secondarily, Emerson Hancock is going to force some uncomfortable decisions and some more uncomfortable conversations for the Mariners moving forward. Let me start on Castillo. Luis Castillo's made 3 starts. The first one against the Yankees was excellent. I was there in Seattle. It was on that Monday night. The Mariners won 3-2 on the walk-off by Cal Raleigh. He was excellent that day. But he has had 2 consecutive clunkers. A clunker against the Angels last Sunday, a clunker against the Astros on Saturday night. He's failed to get through the 4th inning in both of those starts. I certainly don't like it, especially after we saw Castillo get hammered, from August on of last season. It's very evident that Luis Castillo is no longer the guy that he was in 2022. But it is too early to talk about making drastic changes to the rotation. For starters, Luis Castillo is a veteran making $25 million or whatever. They're not going to cut Luis Castillo. People who think they should just get rid of him, they're not. Nobody is going to trade for this version of Luis Castillo making $25 million. So that's not going to happen. Luis Castillo has never been in the bullpen before, at least to my knowledge, off the top of my head, in his career. They're not going to put him in the bullpen without it drastically falling off the wheels or drastically going off the track for a long period of time, and we're not there yet. So, barring injury, Luis Castillo is going to stay in the rotation, and he is going to have a solid leash in doing it. A lot of people that hit my social media feed don't seem to care about clubhouse dynamics. I do care about clubhouse dynamics, and I care about them very, very deeply. If we're all worried about how Randy Arozarena and Cal Raleigh get along with each other after a failed handshake in the World Baseball Classic, I think you need to be worried about what the dynamic would be if the Mariners try to take their most senior pitcher and their veteran leader of their staff and their highest paid pitcher and take him out of the rotation. That is a hard conversation to have, and that's a clubhouse issue that you don't need to cause after 2 subpar starts. So those levers don't get pulled unless they absolutely have to, and right now they don't. Yes, Castillo has struggled for the last 2 games. I do think the Angels and the Astros are tougher matchups for Castillo in that they are generally early swinging teams and free swinging teams. They're teams that make a lot of contact and make a lot of contact early. I actually think the underlying metrics on Castillo are fairly encouraging. I mean, he's hitting 97 miles an hour. 97 miles an hour on his fastball. That's velocity we don't typically see from Castillo early in the year. So I think by and large, the stuff still plays. And I think at the back end of the rotation, I think he's solid enough. You don't give up or give away pitching, especially veteran pitching, because the minute you do that is the minute injury strikes your rotation. Just look at the Toronto Blue Jays. So I know people are annoyed by what we've seen from Castillo, but we are a ways away from any kind of Castillo bullpen or Castillo DFA discourse. So I think you can let those thoughts land in your Twitter drafts for now rather than hitting send. I think that Castillo is still fine at the back end. They need to find a way to get him through 5 instead of 3 2/3. And if they do that, I think they will generally be okay with things. As for Emerson Hancock, I think that Emerson Hancock has pitched well enough to stay in the starting rotation. Now, I don't think this is a conversation that the Mariners really need to have just yet. I think Bryce Miller is probably at least a month away from re-entering the rotation. A lot can happen over the course of a month. But if we get to a point where Emerson Hancock is still pitching well and where everyone is healthy, I think I would have a very hard time removing Emerson Hancock from the rotation, and begrudgingly, I'd have to start thinking about a 6-man rotation. I don't really love that in the middle of the season. A 6-man rotation at the beginning of the year or the end of the year, when there's a lot of off days and there's rain outs and all of that, I think that a 6-man rotation is much more stomachable at the beginning of a season. In the middle of a season, I think it's a lot harder to execute because you end up with things like 13 games in 13 days, and you need a deep bullpen. And if you have a 6-man rotation, you are not able to have that deep bullpen. But again, Emerson Hancock has pitched well enough so far to warrant staying in the rotation. He's got 2 quality starts. He's got 1 start that he made it through 5 against the Astros, and I believe gave up 3 runs, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, that's right. 3 runs on Friday night. So a 6-man rotation is something I think the Mariners would have to consider. Now, you would end up with roster issues if you do this, because let's just play it out. If Bryce Miller comes back and you're keeping Emerson Hancock, well, then Cole Wilcox is easily the guy sent down. Fine. Well, what happens when Carlos Vargas comes back? That's probably going to be the end of May. Is Carlos Vargas going to come back and you're going to DFA Casey Legumina or Cooper Criswell to put back Vargas? I don't know that they want to do that. You're going to move Hancock down to bring back Vargas? Like, you're just kind of delaying the inevitable with him? I don't know about that either. But it's a conversation that is going to need to happen. Emerson Hancock's velocity gains are real. The sweeper is real. The arm slot changes are real. And as a result, I think Emerson Hancock, at least so far, again, a lot can happen in a month, but I think Emerson Hancock so far deserves the benefit of the doubt of staying in the rotation. And I think Bryce Miller deserves to come back in the rotation when he is healthy and ready to as well. So if we get to a month out from now and everyone is healthy, I think a 6-man rotation is something that has to be talked about, but it's not something that I necessarily love. All right, let's talk about roster issues moving forward. Let's talk about one more roster question before we get to our guest here. And it's also something that's in the future, but I think it's coming sooner. I think this conversation is coming sooner than the Bryce Miller, Emerson Hancock rotation question. We know that Colt Emerson is coming. It's a question of when, but we know that Colt Emerson is coming. The assumption is that when Colt Emerson gets here, he will play third base. That then what? Frees up Brendan Donovan to play left field and Randy Arozarena to DH. Randy Arozarena to play left field, Brendan Donovan to DH, Brendan Donovan to play second, Cole Young to DH, whatever it is. The DH spot becomes accounted for when Colt Emerson is playing third base. I think we all recognize that. Colt Emerson plays third, and then everybody else is forced to kind of rotate, and somebody lands in the DH spot. Well, I think the assumption all along has been that when Colt Emerson comes up, Leo Rivas is the guy sent down. I'm not including Connor Joe in this because I'm just eventually going to say that Victor Robles comes back and Connor Joe goes down. So I'm not including Connor Joe as a corresponding move. The assumption, I think, has been that Leo Rivas gets sent down once Colt Emerson comes up. I am not convinced that that is going to be the case, and here is why. And we saw a good example of it, a good precursor to the example of it on Monday against the Astros. Mitch Garver caught. Cal Raleigh played DH. And then as a result, Luke Raley was in right field and Dominic Canzone was on the bench. So right now in the battle between Raley and Canzone, Raley is winning it. For right now, the battle of Raley versus Canzone, Raley is winning the battle. So let's play it out further. If Colt Emerson is here, Cal Raleigh catches. Colt Emerson is at third. Randy Arozarena is in left. Brendan Donovan is the DH. Well, the battle of Raley versus Canzone is being won by Raley. So then Raley goes to right field and Canzone is back on the bench. And what exactly is the point of having yet another left-handed hitting outfielder on the bench? When this team's healthy, this team will have Julio Rodriguez, Victor Robles, Rob Refsnyder, Luke Raley, Randy Arozarena, and Brendan Donovan, all 6 of them that will be capable of playing the outfield. Do you really need Dom Canzone there to be the 7th outfielder And to be a guy who is, not even starting at that point in the role we expected him to start at, DH against right-handed pitching. I'm not convinced that Dom Canzone won't be the guy sent down when Colt Emerson comes up. I know that Dom Canzone has power. I know that Dom Canzone's underlying metrics are fairly good. Dom Canzone is hitting 206 with a 289 on-base percentage, and now he is not consistently playing in the role that we thought he was going to play in, DH against right-handed pitching. So why would the Mariners keep Leo Rivas? Well, Leo Rivas has the ability to hit right-handed, right? He can switch hit, so he has the ability to hit right-handed. That's important. Do the Mariners want Josh Naylor, J.P. Crawford, Cole Young, Colt Emerson, and Brendan Donovan, five infielders to all be left-handed? I think not. I don't believe the Mariners want 5 left-handed hitting infielders with no right-handed hitting infielders. Leo Rivas gives you the ability to have a right-handed hitting infielder. Not to mention, he also runs well. He also is generally solid defensively. He can play the other defensive positions, second, short, and third. That, to me, seems more valuable than Dom Canzone. Now, I should have prefaced all of this by saying Dom Canzone does have an option year available. Like, he can be sent down. So him and Rivas are both easy send downs logistically, but Canzone, I'm starting to think, makes more sense because Dom Canzone doesn't play great defense. He doesn't hit for a high average, and he doesn't run particularly well. So he is a power hitter. So if he's been reduced from the designated hitter platoon role at that point, then what is he? He's a pinch hitter and another left-handed hitter that clogs up. I mean, the Mariners will be so left-handed heavy, it's not even funny. I am really starting to think that if we get to this point where everyone is healthy and Colt Emerson comes up, I'm starting to think that Dominic Canzone is going to be the guy that is sent down. I know the underlying metrics. If you go look at his Baseball Savant page, a lot of it is in red. But roster-wise, Leo Rivas does seem to make more sense in a lot of ways. All right, I want to go out to the phone line, and I want to bring on a very special, a very different guest here. His name is Taimur Rushdie. And let me tell you a little bit about Taimur Rushdie. When I was in Seattle for opening day a couple of weeks ago, I hung out with the Marine Lair guys, right? Lyle and TJ, friends of this show, hung out with them on a couple of different occasions, right? In the press box, at the ballpark, whatever. Well, on opening night Thursday, they did a live show at the Hall on Occidental, which is a brewery or a bar brewery down the road from T-Mobile Park. So after the game was over, after the Mariners had lost to Cleveland, they did a live podcast at the Hall on Occidental. And I went and watched it, right? I'm in town. I'm not in town very often. I wanted to get out and do some other things. I like Lyle and TJ. I like their work. We're friends, in the professional space, and I wanted to go support them. So as I go support them at the Hall on Occidental, I get talking to some of the other listeners who were there. And one of the listeners who was there is a guy by the name of Taimur Rushdie. And through the conversation, I found out that Taimur Rushdie is not only a big Mariners fan, he's a big Mariners fan from the United Kingdom. And that alone is interesting to me, like how a guy in the United Kingdom becomes a Mariners fan. But going further than that, I learned that Taimur Rushdie works in professional sports. He works in the English Premier League, arguably the most popular sports league in the world, the English Premier League, British soccer. And he works for Nottingham Forest in their front office. So now we have a professional sports front office member from the United Kingdom that has traveled all the way to Seattle to watch the Mariners, who are his favorite team. And now he and I are next to each other at the Marine Lairs live podcast at the Hall on Occidental. I said to myself, we got to get that guy on Refuse to Lose. Now, he also told me he listens to this podcast, so we appreciate that. But Taimur Rushdie with us now, front office member, Nottingham Forest, English Premier League, Mariners fan. with us here on the show. Tamor, it was a pleasure to meet you a couple of weeks ago. Thanks for making some time with us, my friend. How are you?
I'm very well, Brady. Thank you so much for having me on. Great to be part of the show.
How does one who has lived overseas most of their life become a baseball fan and nevertheless settle on the Mariners?
Well, the baseball fan starts actually from the movie Rookie of the Year, if you know the movie. Loved it growing up. I must have watched it 50 times. And actually, I was originally a Chicago Cubs fan because of the movie. But I've never been to Wrigley. I've never been to a game. But my cousin lives out in Seattle, and so does my brother. And I went out to visit my cousin a few times, and actually he took me to my first Mariners game back in 2008. And instantly I was hooked. And the ballpark just was magical in my opinion. And I mean, I love sporting events in general, but it just felt so special to be there. The Mariners, although being in the dark days of the Mariners, they won that game. And I just got hooked from there. And I'm just in general, I'm a bit of a sports junkie. I love all my sports, and whether it's American sports, even things over here I love rugby, I love cricket. I'm a big tennis fan, big golf fan, but I do have a passion for the American sports, and I'm a big fan of everything Seattle sports because I ended up going to the University of Washington, which is probably the best decision of my life, and adopted all of the Seattle sports teams as my go-to teams. Whether it's professional teams or, of course, I'm a passionate University of Washington Husky. I probably bleed purple and gold. Anyone that knows me will be able to tell you that. But yeah, if you ask me really what's my number one go-to thing that I love to watch, amazingly, it's baseball. And I've just been a Mariner fan ever since.
So you were overseas and then came to the U.S. and then back overseas. How often do you get to watch the Mariners, follow the Mariners? What is it like to follow the Mariners from that far away?
Well, you know what? When I was living in the U.S., it was great because I used to work in the MLS, and I would just have I had the at-bat, have MLB at bat, and I was living in Salt Lake City at one point as well. So I was just, I'd have it. I'd have the games. All the games would be on in the background at home or at work if it was a day game, and it just worked out really well. I moved back to the UK, and it got a lot more difficult because the approximately 7 p.m., whether it's 6:40 or 7:10 or whatever, in Seattle is a bit of a nightmare for me because that's 3 a.m. So those games I tend to miss unless I'm up late doing something crazy. I tend to miss those ones and I watch them back on like a condensed version or something like that. But I get all the day games. And then oftentimes when they're on the East Coast, I'm a bit of a night owl anyway. So when they're on the East Coast and the game begins at 7 o'clock, that's about midnight for me. I have no problem staying up till midnight, catching the game, and then going to bed after that, which is great. So East Coast and then West Coast day games are usually my the ones I get to watch. And then the 7 o'clock on the West Coast, unfortunately I have to skip out on.
Not being a Mariners fan for as long as I have, you didn't wear the stench of the drought for as long as a lot of fans, but you've still been a part of the drought. So what did it mean to you, 2022 breaking the drought, 2025 getting into the ALCS? What did that mean to you?
Everything. I mean, it's funny. I decided to be a Mariners fan, not understanding what I was getting myself into, not knowing the pain I was setting myself up for. And I remember vividly being on my couch in Nottingham, watching that game in 2022 and just absolutely losing my mind when Cal hit that home run. And it was just so special, so amazing. And to the point where I was like, oh my God, I have to go to Toronto. So I literally, spur of the moment, booked a trip to Toronto, went for the first, I got tickets to the first 2 games through an MLS contact, actually. Amazing seats, just on like the third base line. And I thought, okay, I'll get 2 of the 3 games. If they win one, great. At that point, just so happy to be there with zero expectancy. And they won the first 2. And then, of course, the game 2 was just that incredible comeback. And it was, to this day, one of the best. I was literally in Toronto for 60 hours. I just went for the 2 games and then came back. And it's one of the best trips I've ever made in my life. I had the most fun. And it's amazing how those sorts of things can create some of the best ever memories. And and then this past season, wow, it was just, there was almost like this wave of incredibleness. And unfortunately, I didn't get back to Seattle for any of the games. due to my work commitments over here. I really wanted to, but I was watching a lot of these playoff games again at obscene hours of the morning, and I really thought at one point I just felt like it was meant to be. We were going to get there, and it was so close. And yeah, it was heartbreaking, but I'll tell you what, those memories are just so special, because I think, I work in sports as well. So you see the pain and the suffering of the previous years make the reward that much sweeter. When you're making it every single year and you're winning all the time, you sometimes take for granted what it takes to win and to what it means to win. When you don't win for a long time and you then finally get that feeling, it's really extra special, I think.
Let's talk about a little bit of the crossover. So you work for Nottingham FC in the English Premier League, arguably the most popular sporting league in the entire world. What exactly is your position with Nottingham?
Yeah, so I work at Nottingham Forest, where I'm the head of football administration. So it's a bit like, it's very hard to kind of translate the roles, but it's a bit like an assistant GM type role in the American sporting landscape, with regards to, I manage all of the player contracts in terms of draft, getting them ready for, once we've agreed to sign a player, and it works a little bit differently between baseball and soccer, but when players transfer from other clubs to ours, a lot of times it's for transfer fees rather than trades, as they do in the American sports. And so I'm kind of at the end of that process. Once a deal has been agreed, I kind of effectuate that. I also manage our relationship with the league, so the Premier League, with our national association, the Football Association, as well as the world governing body FIFA and the European governing body UEFA. And I also handle all the immigration for our club. I think benefit from the fact that I've lived abroad, understand what it takes to get visas and international clearance for players. And yeah, that all kind of falls under my umbrella and my team's umbrella here at the football club. And I love it, to be honest. I love the world of football administration and just sports administration in general. It's an interesting world, because no day is ever the same. Everything can change, and last minute decisions, last minute injuries, whatever, create their own hurdles for us as administrators. And it will be not the exact same, but there will be similarities between what I do in soccer to baseball to American football to rugby. And it is actually very interesting I would love to meet more people that do similar roles to me in other sports, just to see how they figure it out and how they navigate that world.
Talk to me about the relationships that the front office has with players, because I've seen it go both ways. I've seen front office members who are very close to players, and they really do forge bonds, which can be good or bad depending on the situation. And I've seen front office members that are very, very hands off, that are very much like, you are the player, I will leave you alone and let you play, and I will just handle the business side of things. How do you handle front office and player relationships?
I think it's important to have a good relationship with the players, but I'm also very cognizant of the fact that there needs to be a certain boundary there, especially given that we're managing their contracts, their renegotiation, and ultimately, when a player leaves the club as well, that's you're also one of the last people to say goodbye in some respects. And I think because of that, there needs to be a certain line, a certain level of respect between player and administrator, just to avoid getting too comfortable with each other, which can sometimes create difficult scenarios. I'm fortunate enough that I have a positive relationship with most of our guys, and I think we're also very lucky to have a pretty great group of players in general, just that are not just, take away the footballing side of it, as just people. They're pretty good guys, and I've been parts of teams with unbelievable guys. I've been parts of teams where maybe you have a few more difficult eggs in the camp, but it's always interesting, because everyone's a little bit different. Everyone's a little bit more, everyone has their own quirks. And you kind of have to, I think one of the biggest skills in working in this industry is being able to understand that and being able to adapt to the different personalities and the different cultures of people that come into your building. Because, when I was in Salt Lake, for example, we had a lot of guys from Latin America playing in the MLS at that time. And, you have to understand that they have a different way of thinking than, for example, the English or the Americans. And you have to be able to assimilate that into your group seamlessly, because ultimately you've got people that are from that area of the world, but then you've also got loads of Americans on the team as well. In my world here in England, in the Premier League, I mean, our team is a blend of, we have at least 15 different nationalities in our building, at least. And it's great, actually, because and I think it's great because you see a lot of guys interacting with other guys and learning off each other, and just, you build. The nice thing about sports is you have this camaraderie a lot. You build this relationship inside the locker room that doesn't necessarily exist in other industries, because you're kind of in it together. You've got the pressure of the world against you. Sometimes you got the pressure of the supporters. The supporters obviously want they want to win. They want the best for our club, but you feel that in the industry, and I think it brings you together, and I quite like it, to be honest. I love it. I absolutely, I'm doing something I love. So
I want to ask you about the logistics, because I have always wondered this. Guy gets traded to your city, and now all of a sudden someone in the front office is finding that person a house or negotiating how to get their luggage there, how to maybe move their family. And I've always wondered about like how hectic that process gets for members of the front office. You're talking about dealing with immigration and visas and acquiring players and maybe players exiting the organization. What you can tell me, give me some of the logistics behind kind of just how hectic all of those processes are, the things that we as fans never see behind the scenes.
yeah, it's tough. And actually, immigration is one of the hardest parts of my job. And I think a lot of that is, the UK decided, unfortunately, to leave the EU a few years ago. Brexit, I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yes.
And that created a much more difficult landscape, because even previously, players from Europe were able to just come work in the UK without any need for a visa. And it was, so easy, so simple. Now, if you don't have a UK passport, so literally anybody from any other country has to go through this visa process, and it's not simple, because you have to get governing body endorsements, then you have to qualify for that, you have to do paperwork to get that, and then you're also battling the fact that in football we want everything now. We want the player to be registered and available immediately, but you still have to get a visa, you still have to figure out all the logistics around it, and we do our best, and we actually I'm very lucky to work with a great team, and we're able to sometimes turn things around in 24 hours, 48 hours, depending on when we get the information we need off of a player or his agent in this scenario. But it's not simple, and actually we're not just myself in the football administration team, but you just pointed it out. We have what we call player care team that do all of the helping with the move, finding schools for kids, finding houses, cars, bank accounts. Like, there's so many things that go into a player moving. And I think this is where, as a supporter, as a fan, not just in soccer, in any sport, sometimes they put so much, you put so much pressure on a player to perform, but we sometimes forget that they're actually just human beings as well, and have the same difficulties that anybody else would have if you were all of a sudden picking up your life and moving across the world. If you're a banker and all of a sudden you're moving from New York to London, it's a big move. You got to, it's not so simple to just pick up and move. And you're under this extreme pressure because you've got eyeballs on you from, all the supporters around the world, football fans around the world, and they expect you, just because you were brought in for a large amount of money, or you're on a big contract, to immediately perform. But it's not so simple. If your wife or kids, I'm going to give you a really interesting example. I actually just recently watched that Boston Red Sox Netflix documentary where they were following the team around, and they were mentioning their starting pitcher during that year was Brian Bayo. And I remember watching and them saying, "Oh, his wife can't get a visa to come to the United States, so his wife is she's stuck abroad with their child." And I was thinking, man, like, that's tough. Like, no wonder he's having a hard time. Like, it's not easy to just leave your family. No, they can't be with you for X amount of time. In this case, a baseball season, which is 5-6 months long, and immediately be ready to perform and do everything you need to do for the team. Because ultimately, that player is still a human being. He still has feelings. He still has emotions. He still has all the things that go into your day-to-day life that allow you to perform to the best of your ability. They're not robots at the end of the day. And that's why I have a lot of sympathy for players. I'm never the guy that's bashing somebody on Instagram or Twitter. I don't even have Instagram, but on social media in general, because I just believe that these poor guys, like, they are human beings at the end of the day, and it's not their fault that they're being paid loads of money. It's great for them that they're getting paid loads of money, but just because they're getting paid loads of money doesn't mean they're immune to criticism and immune to feelings. And I'm a big believer in that. So from my perspective, I think it's so important that we support not just the guys on our team, but that's why I'm a big supporter of players on whatever sport or team that I'm supporting in that sport. So whether it's the Mariners in baseball, the Seahawks in the NFL, England cricket, for example, whatever it is, like, back the team, back the players, support them, don't boo them, because ultimately you want them to perform you need to support them. They want to be loved. They don't want to be hated.
I want to ask you this, and I hope it's appropriate to ask, and if it's not, you can tell me as such. But we just had this conversation a lot with the World Baseball Classic, right? And Jerry DiPoto made it known that, like, we like the World Baseball Classic, but I'm nervous every time I watch the World Baseball Classic that someone on our team is going to get hurt. This is obviously something that is very prevalent in soccer. There are a bunch of different teams at a bunch of different clubs, and your guys don't necessarily just play for Nottingham. They play other places, but the World Cup is coming up this year. The Olympics will happen as well, and you will see players leave your club and go play other places. How does a front office handle that? I mean, just knowing that your players are not always your players.
I tell you what, it's just like in the World Baseball Classic. It's the same feeling. We have the same nervousness and stress because ultimately, and especially in soccer, the World Cup is everything, and players dream of playing for their country. I think there's a slight nuance or difference between baseball and soccer in that in baseball, you see guys perhaps say no to going to play at the WBC, whereas in football or soccer, it's everything. Guys are desperate to play for their national team, and when they get the honor of playing for their national team, it's they're always going to go, and we would never stop them. We want that for them, but at the same time, the worst can happen. It's happened to us plenty of times in my time at Nottingham Forest, where a guy's gone to play for his national team, and unfortunately, he's gotten an injury and he's out for a certain period of time. There's some that are very short injuries, and we're lucky, and they're nothing crazy. But then we've had a guy, in the previous World Cup, which was the one that happened in the middle of our season. We lost a player for 6 months after that due to an injury. We've had guys go, and the other thing about soccer is that there's not just the World Cup, and we have international windows, periods of time where the national play 4 times a year: September, October, November, and then in March, and actually a 5th time in June once the season is over. So we're at risk all the time of a guy going and coming back with some kind of injury. So we are, nothing we can do. Can only hope. Hope is always our emotion that a guy will go and come back without any major injuries. But unfortunately, it happens, and it's just kind of the nature of the beast. And we just have to get on with it. It sucks. There's no two ways about it. It sucks when it happens, but it can happen.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, as someone who went to the University of Washington and who worked at the men's soccer program, your thoughts on Washington winning the men's national championship this past season.
One of the best moments of my life, Brady. I flew in.
Oh, you did?
I flew in for 12 hours. I flew straight to North Carolina, arrived an hour and a half before kickoff, went to the game. I watched it. So I watched it with a guy named Craig Weibel. Craig Weibel is actually the GM of the Seattle Sounders, or chief soccer officer of this. He was the coach with me when I was at Washington. He was one of the assistant coaches, and he's one of my mentors now. But I went there, met up with him and some other alumni, and it was probably the best 12 hours of my life. I had such a great time because the coach at the University of Washington is still the same coach as when I was there, a guy named Jamie Clark. I know I'm biased, but I also truly believe he's probably the best college soccer coach out there. A genuinely incredible person and genuinely incredible coach, cares about his players like I've never seen a college coach care about their players. And to see him finally get over the line, he's turned that program into one of the top 5 programs in the country. But to see him finally get over the line and win the national championship I've never been so proud in my entire life.
The question I always ask a first-time guest: your favorite little-known or more random non-star Mariner?
Tough one. It's funny. So as an avid listener of the show, I've always thought, how would I answer this question? And because I think it's a brilliant question. I don't know if this counts because he wasn't necessarily little known, but he wasn't necessarily a Mariner for the longest time, and he had one really good season, I would say, but it's JJ Putz. And the reason I'd say JJ Putz is just because I go back to when I started being a Mariners fan, and one of these games that I went to, one of my first memories is watching a game that he came in and closed out, and it was in that season where he was an all-star. And the music that he came out to, and that whole experience, I thought, wow, this is so cool. This is so amazing. I felt like Safeco Field in those days. It was just rocking. And he always sticks out as one of my first memories as a Mariner fan. And so I always think of JJ Putz. So that's why my answer is JJ Putz.
My fun story is I played catch with JJ Putz before.
No way.
So I spent 2 years coaching junior college baseball in New York. And we were close. We were the closest school to Cooperstown. So
Okay.
every year they have the Hall of Fame Classic where they would bring back a player who had retired within the last few years that could still play but was no longer playing in the big leagues, and they would play an exhibition game. And our team got to work at that event. So I would, do whatever. I bullpen catcher, throw with outfielders, whatever. JJ Putz was there one year. I believe he was representing the Mariners. He might have been representing the Diamondbacks, but I think it was the Mariners. So I warmed up with JJ Putz in left field at Cooperstown Doubleday Field one year. Eddie Guardado was there another year representing the Mariners. So I've done this a few times, but there's my JJ Putz story of
awesome.
playing catch with JJ Putz in left field in Cooperstown.
That is awesome.
So that was a good time, man. This was a good time as well. Tamor Rushdie. The English Premier League's on between like 6 and 9 a.m. every Saturday. All my friends watch it. I never do. The next time I see Nottingham, man, I'm in. I'm telling you, because of you, I am going to be in the next time I see Nottingham. And when they win, I'm going to say, guy who helped build that, I know that guy. Tamor Rushdie.
If you're ever in town, let me know. If you ever come to the UK, you're welcome to the City Ground anytime. My
brother and dad they talk about it all the time. My brother was talking to me about riding the tube the other day. He loves London. He loves England. So it just might happen. You might regret that and end up with tickets for 3 the next time. But
no problem.
Tamor, man, it was really cool to meet you in person at Lyle and TJ's show. I appreciate you coming on our show. And look, I would love to stay in touch down the line.
Absolutely. Great to speak with you, Brady, and all the best. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. That's Tamor Rushdie from Nottingham Forest of the English Premier League. And it goes to show, everybody, the world is a big place, but sometimes you make these relationships that make it feel small, right? Like, I have gotten to know Lyle and TJ at the Marine Lair. I appreciate what they do. I just wanted to go to their show to support them. And you end up meeting really interesting people at their show, people you form a kind of a bond with via the Mariners, and Tamor Rushdie ends up on Refuse to Lose. And now I have to start following English Premier League soccer. So really good stuff with Tamor Rushdie. Really good stuff on this episode. Really good stuff for the Mariners as a whole. The Mariners have won 4 consecutive games. They are 8-9. They're looking to get back to 500 on Tuesday night. Brian Wu will be on the mound for them in San Diego. And then we'll start the merry-go-round again with Emerson Hancock and then Luis Castillo before they come home for a weekend series with Texas. But the Mariners, a quick 3-game road trip to San Diego to face their Peoria spring training mates in the Padres. And we are off and running. 17 games into the season. The Mariners looking to get back to 500. Appreciate Tamor Rushdie. Appreciate all of you who watched it live. Those of you who will listen subsequently on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, thank you as well. Again, the number one thing you can do to support myself and Taryn is joining the Mariners Roundtable community, marinersroundtable.com. If you're watching this video or any highlights, there's a QR code over my shoulder. It takes you right to our homepage. Hit join. It is totally free. Trust me, it helps us more than you know it. So much appreciated to everybody who has done it and everybody who will continue to do it. We'll see you again on Thursday for another edition of the Buster Olney Show here on the Refuse to Lose podcast, and then another full episode on Friday in which we recap what happened in San Diego. As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for following along. Thanks for reading at marinersroundtable.com. And as always, also, go M's.